Perfection sounds like the ultimate goal, until you realize achieving it would destroy the very thing that made you love creating in the first place. Some people dedicate their lives to money, others want power, status, relationships, success, recognition. Meanwhile, someone else could want absolutely nothing to do with any of these things. We're all different in what we value, but there's one thing almost everybody seems to obsess over at some point: perfection. We grow up hearing nobody's perfect, yet we still spend years trying to become exactly that. Especially creatives, artists, athletes, writers, musicians, gamers, people who deeply care about improving themselves often fall into the same trap, believing that if something isn't perfect, then it isn't good enough. But perfection isn't inspiring. If anything, it's destructive. Perfection has always been glorified in media. Think about how many villains in movies, anime, or games claim they've, quote, achieved perfection. The reason that line sounds so intimidating is because perfection feels untouchable. It sounds like the final stage or final evolution, something beyond human limitations. But those characters almost always lose. And I think there's a reason for that. Human nature is built around adaptation. We constantly improve, learn, and overcome what once seemed impossible. The thing we once viewed as perfect eventually stops looking impressive altogether. Adaptation is a heroic trait. Overcoming is human nature. The speedrunning community is one of the best real world examples of this. People spend years optimizing games down to the frame, chasing what they believe is the perfect run, and eventually someone breaks that record anyways. Not because the previous player was bad, but because we learned more. A new strategy was discovered, a new mechanic was understood differently. The limits have changed and the bar's been moved. That's why I don't believe most people are chasing true perfection. They're chasing what I'd call perceptual perfection, a temporary human idea of what the best looks like at any given moment of time. True perfection will be unchangeable, permanent, untouchable. That's where the problem of striving for perfection really lies. If you fail to reach your impossible standard, you feel inadequate. But if you somehow do reach your version of perfect, the excitement disappears shortly after because there's nowhere left to go. You see this constantly in competitive spaces. A speedrunner spends years grinding for a world record, finally achieves it, and then suddenly loses interest in the game entirely. The journey's over. No more improvement. The obsession that once gave the game meaning disappears. We always think what we could have done better looking back on our lives. But imagine the opposite for a second. Imagine there truly was nothing left to improve, nothing left to learn, no mistakes to fix. That wouldn't feel fulfilling. Eventually, it'd only feel empty. Mayuri's speech from Bleach perfectly sums up my point. Non anime lovers, just stay with me for a bit here. And for those who are still wanting to experience Bleach fresh, I promise there's no significant spoilers. Now, let me set the scene. We're observing a battle of science, a fight of wits, two of the smartest characters we'd seen up to that point, trying to prove who was superior. One man was hyperfixated on perfection, and the other, quite the opposite. All it took was him hearing the words perfect from a fellow scientist for him to finally dive into his philosophy. Mayuri responds to a self proclaimed perfection speech simply with this.
But ultimately, I have to ask myself, what is the true meaning of being perfect? And the answer I came up with was nothing. Not one thing. The truth of the matter is, I despise perfection. If something is truly perfect, that's it. The bottom line becomes, there is no room for imagination. No space for intelligence, or ability, or improvement. Do you understand? To men of science like us, perfection is a dead end, a condition of hopelessness. Always strive to be better than anything that came before you, but not perfect. Scientists agonize over the attempt to achieve perfection. That's the kind of creatures we are. We take joy in trying to exceed our grasp, in trying to reach for something that, in the end, we have to admit, may in fact be unreachable. In other words, you may think that we operate on the same level, but you're wrong. The moment you started talking about perfection, you embraced an impossible concept, and it already lost to me.
Now, this quote isn't powerful because it says perfection is impossible. Most people already know that. It's powerful because it explains why perfection would actually be horrible if it did exist. The idea that perfection leaves no room for imagination, intelligence, or improvement perfectly captures why humans are drawn towards growth in the first place. Creativity only exists because there are flaws, there's limitations, and there's unknowns to overcome. So, what are you chasing, anyways? Perceptual perfection is subjective. We change constantly. The version of perfect you're chasing today probably wouldn't even impress the person you were a few years ago. So, does this perfect standard we obsess over truly even exist? Or is it just constantly moving alongside us? Every single day, you wake up a slightly different person. Your perspective shifts, your taste evolves, your favorite artist's work might not hit the same way it used to. Even your goals slowly change without you realizing it. There's a saying that you can never step in the same river twice, because both you and the river are constantly changing. I think that applies most internally. We're never truly the same person twice. We continuously flow, adapt, and evolve. And honestly, that's one of the best parts about being human. So, what's the difference between striving for your perception of greatness versus striving for your perception of perfection? When exactly does it become toxic? There's nothing wrong with ambition. There's nothing wrong with wanting to improve, wanting to become better, or wanting to push yourself beyond what you thought you were capable of. The problem starts when your self worth becomes tied to achieving an impossible standard. People love saying shoot for the stars, but when your goal is impossibly far away, it becomes hard to appreciate the smaller victories that actually move you forward. Every step feels so insignificant because all you can think about is how far you still have to go. This is why small goals matter. If you want to build a rocket, you don't start by obsessing over reaching the moon. You start by gathering materials, and those small steps deserve to be celebrated because progress is what keeps people motivated long enough to continue growing. Perfectionists often struggle with this because perfection has no measurable milestones. What does a small step towards perfection even look like? The finish line for it constantly moves. Greatness, on the other hand, is different. Greatness allows room for growth, room for mistakes, room for individuality, and most importantly, room for you to forgive yourself for not being perfect right now. When shooting for perfection, you give yourself no lenience at all. I think the reason humans are so obsessed with perfection is because we confuse it with fulfillment. We assume that once we finally become good enough, we'll feel complete. But fulfillment was never supposed to come from arriving at some flawless final version of yourself. It comes from growing, from learning, adapting, improving, from creating despite imperfections. Because if perfection truly existed, there would be nowhere left to go, no discovery left to make, no reason to continue striving towards anything. The beauty of being human is that we're unfinished. So learn how to love your flaws. With that said, I hope you enjoyed this small little rant about perfection. By all means, take care and continue improving.